Hello, I'm Esther Gitu-Ewart. It's Wednesday, March 22nd. This is Africa 54. Uganda's parliament passes a law that criminalizes identifying as LGBTQ, handing authorities broad new powers. It's World Water Day, a day to raise awareness of the more than 2 billion people living without access to safe water. We'll report on the water situation in Zimbabwe. And in our technology report, we'll speak to a Nigerian analyst about the technological tools aimed at improving transparency on the nation's electoral process. All that and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. Ethiopian lawmakers are removing the Tigray People's Liberation Front from the country's list of designated terror groups. The action comes more than 4 months after a peace agreement ended a conflict that killed hundreds of thousands of people. Wednesday's decision highlights the improving relations between federal officials and Tigray regional officials. The TPLF dominated Ethiopian politics for nearly 3 decades before Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed took office in 2018. The Tigray conflict began in the late 2020. Most of Ethiopia's 547 lawmakers voted to remove the TPLF from the terror list with 61 objections and 5 abstentions, according to the state-run Ethiopian Broadcasting Corporation. Now, for more on this latest move, I'm joined by Winter Kidane, a VOA Horn of Africa reporter. Winter, tell us more about the lawmakers' actions today.
Thank you, Esther, for having me. So the decision of the lawmakers from the House of Representatives today comes up as a follow-up of the Pretoria Peace Accord. In the agreement, it's stated in Article 7 to C as one of the preconditions to remove TPLF from the list of terrorist groups, and today the representatives voted to remove TPLF from the list of the terrorist group. 61 of the representatives opposed the decision and 5 abstained, but majority of them decided to remove TPLF from the list. And
so what's the reaction now of the TPLF leaders?
The TPLF leaders have responded quickly, and they have welcomed the decision. Kindia Gabriel would say that it is a good decision to move forward with the peace agreement, and they also say that TPLF shouldn't be in that list in the first place. But now that it's removed, it is a good move towards the peace agreement and the sustainability peace process in the region.
And what are Ethiopians generally saying about this new move by the government? What's their reaction?
As I mentioned earlier, there were opposition from the representatives of some regions, especially from the Amhara region, saying that how it's going to be guaranteed that the TPLF will not wage another war, and this is the representatives saying. And they also were not saying also there was not enough time to discuss on the matter, that the parliament make the decision in this one particular meeting. But our reporters are reaching out to the general public in collecting vox pop from the general public regarding the decision.
All right, Winter, thank you so much for your reporting.
Thank you, Esther. Thank you for having me.
Winter Kidane is a VOA Horn of Africa reporter. Now to Uganda, where lawmakers have passed sweeping anti-gay legislation that proposed jail terms of up to 10 years for offenses related to the same-sex relations. The move responds to popular sentiment but increases pressure on the East African country's LGBTQ community. VOA's Anthony Labruto has more.
It's mixed feelings on the streets downtown in the Ugandan capital Kampala after Parliament on Tuesday passed sweeping anti-gay legislation which proposes tough new penalties for same-sex relationships.
This House will not shy to restrict any right to the extent of the House recognizing that recognizes, protects, and safeguards the sovereignty of this country, the morals of this country, the cultures, and will always legislate for our people.
Once the president signs this bill into law, it criminalizes identifying as LGBTQ, handing authorities broad new powers to target Ugandans who already face legal discrimination and mob violence. Nevertheless, proponents say this is an excellent day for Uganda. However, supporters of the new law say it is needed to punish a broader array of LGBTQ activities, which they say threaten traditional values in the conservative and religious East African nation.
In our country, we will have our morals. We will protect our children. And we are making this law. We are making this law for ourselves. We are making this law for our children. We are making this law for the children of our children.
On the streets, people share the same sentiment.
The bill was passed yesterday and we are very happy. As citizens of Uganda, culturally, we don't accept the homosexuality, lesbianism, LGBTQ.
In addition, media groups, journalists, and publishers also face prosecution and imprisonment for publishing, broadcasting, or distributing content that advocates for gay rights or promotes homosexuality. LGBTQ activist Eric Ndwala says he was scared for his life after a video he circulated online identified Ndwala as gay.
We are scared, but we don't want to get arrested and become, news at that day. So we are looking at a wave of organizations going back in fear. The NGO report that came out on investigations of almost 22 LGBTQ organizations, it just puts us back into fear.
Currently we are fearing because we don't know which school has issues about homosexuality, and we are fearing, we are in fear. That's the truth.
Frank Mugisha is a rights activist whose charity was closed last year. He is worried about what could happen to people who identify as LGBTQ.
From all different bodies of government is a clear indication that they want to erase anything around the human rights of LGBTQ persons in Uganda.
Uganda is notorious for intolerance of homosexuality, which is criminalized under colonial-era laws. In 2014, Ugandan lawmakers passed a bill that called for life in prison for people caught having gay sex. The legislation sparked international condemnation, with some Western nations freezing or redirecting millions of dollars of government aid in response, before a court later struck down the law on a technicality. Anthony Labruto, VOA News, Washington.
Joining me live via Skype from Kampala, Uganda, is Mude Kasaja, a television news editor with Uganda Broadcasting Corporation. Mude, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you.
So tell me, what kind of challenges are you experiencing as a journalist covering this story?
Well, when it comes to Uganda, especially the mainstream media, anything to do with the gay has always been done. Society rejects it. So it has been natural that, except for the bloggers, in the mainstream media, we've not been covering the gay in any way that promotes LGBTQ or the LGBTQ agenda. So in that case, we find there is nothing new for us in the mainstream media. Nothing has changed, except that now it has been legislated, and it's going to be very difficult for any TV station or radio station, especially the mainstream media, to host a gay or a lesbian, whoever falls under those pronouns and alphabets. It's going to be very difficult for them now because they were getting bolder and bolder by the day, especially when the previous law was repealed. You find that the LGBT community was getting bolder. They were using the social media. They were also getting to the mainstream media, being posted, talking about their rights and their plight. But now that the legislation has come, a more clear legislation, when consented to by the president, I think it's going to be very difficult for them to show up anywhere.
Mude, very briefly, what's the reaction of the LGBTQ community in Uganda?
Come again?
What's the reaction of the LGBT community right there in Uganda?
The reaction of the LGBT community?
It seems we're having some audio issues. I wanted to know the reaction of the LGBT community, but it looks like we're having issues. I think we're going to move on. Mude, thank you very much for your time and your reporting. Mude Kasaja is a television news editor with Uganda Broadcasting Corporation. And let's move on again to here downtown Washington, D.C., where we have more insight on this legislation. And I'm joined here in Washington by Karim Ntambi, a Ugandan human rights activist. Hello, Karim.
Hello, Esther. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, a similar law had been passed in the past in Uganda, that was nullified by the High Court. What makes this law different?
What makes it different is the timing. The journey for striping rights of the LGBT community started a long time ago. It started way back in 2009, and they have been trying. The government has been trying to pass this legislation for so long, and I believe Museveni realized that it would be better to appeal to Uganda people's emotions at a time when there has been gross human rights violations. So he needed to find something that can rally the conservative community together, and there was nothing better than trying to see that they pass this legislation. And believe me, there are so many people out there who are going to fight this legislation in courts of law. I understand that some of our communities have been pretty much conservative. However, we have seen an evolution on the sentiments around LGBT rights. Even here in the United States, you would recall it took fighting Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It took wins of the US to make sure that LGBT community gets their rights. And we know that with time, Ugandans will wake up to realize that taking rights of one Ugandans can eventually end up hurting each and everybody.
And like you say, many African countries have banned same-sex relationships. What seems to be the common reason for this stance?
I think they have packaged this legislation as a way of protecting children. When they are saying it, they say there has been recruitment in schools for young children to become LGBT, and that's easy for people to appeal to their emotions. Unfortunately, the regime of Yoweri Museveni is not that we can trust with protecting our children. The regime of Yoweri Museveni started in 1986 in bushes with child soldiers. We have seen how young girls were treated during the lockdown, during COVID. So when COVID hit and there was a lockdown, so many young children, so many young girls were raped and others got pregnant. And when Museveni himself was asked, when the question was posed to him, what should we do for these children? He said, oh, they are not going to die. They just got pregnant. Wow. So a person who is telling a 10-year-old that you haven't...
We're going to have to leave it there for today. We're running out of time. Karim, thank you very much for your insight.
You're welcome.
Karim Ntambi is a Ugandan human rights activist. It's World Water Day, a day to raise the awareness of the more than 2 billion people living without access to safe water. In Zimbabwe, the water supply is strained by a failing infrastructure that's vulnerable to contamination and by political infighting that is blocking improvements. Keith Baptist reports from Harare.
Marjorie Sande manages this public borehole in Mbare, a poor and crowded suburb of Zimbabwe's capital city, Harare. These kinds of sites shorten the distance to clean water, a blessing in a metropolitan area cursed with access problems for years.
A lot of people actually prefer to use bush pumps as opposed to the tap water from the city council.
Poor neighborhoods bear the brunt of water shortages, as residents often turn to public water points for free or low-cost access. Harare's Mayor Jacob Mafume says the local reservoir, built in the 1950s, isn't big enough to serve the community.
It was designed for a population of 500,000 people, and the greater Harare population has got 3 million people. So demand is outstripped supply.
President Emerson Mnangagwa introduced a borehole plan in early 2022 to improve water access in Zimbabwe. The plan builds on long-running efforts by local and international aid groups to provide public water sites. UNICEF set up the bush pump that Sande manages. But the women who come here say they are being harassed and sometimes physically attacked. Some men jump the water line. Others, so-called borehole marshals, illegally take charge of water points and demand obedience, cash, or sexual favors in exchange for water access.
As women, we usually queue early for water so that we can get enough time to prepare our kids for school. But when these men arrive, they disregard the queues and go straight to the front and fetch water. So this causes disputes and unended heated arguments.
A rape clinic official at Parirenyatwa Hospital in Harare says there have been many reports of people being harassed or assaulted while fetching water.
So this sexual assault that takes place is a complex of a lot of things. So it can be as subtle as, if you want water, then you need to give me some form of sexual services.
Many victims do not come forward due to shame, fear, stigma, or simply because they do not know what action to take, says Rutendo Mudavanu. She works with a female empowerment program, Shamwari ya Mwanasikana, which in Shona means friends of the girl child. To help, the NGO also has recruited male volunteers to aid at water points.
Our main aim is to fight gender-based violence, so we are already having people at most of the water points.
Advocates say women should have more of a say in the design, management, and location of water points and sanitation facilities.
We would really want a permanent solution where we can access water from our own taps, from the comfort of our homes.
For Keith Baptist in Harare, Zimbabwe, Carol Gunsberg, VOA News.
Still to come, the latest highlights from the Basketball Africa League. We'll be right back.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, a former US president could face criminal charges, and the International Criminal Court issues an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin on charges of war crimes in Ukraine. Also, demonstrators protest in Kenya and South Africa. They want their presidents to step down. Join me, Hayley Adams, for the discussion on the next Straight Talk Africa.
In other news, Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune says he will soon send his nation's ambassador Said Moussi back to Paris. The announcement comes just weeks after he withdrew the envoy following a diplomatic spat over a French-Algerian activist. 4 straight years of flooding has swamped 2/3 of South Sudan, but Bentiu, a northern city, is especially besieged by floodwaters. All roads out of Bentiu are flooded, including the lifeline to Sudan that once provided the capital of Unity State with most of its food. Supplies must now be brought many days over the floodplain by canoes. And Tanzania's National Public Laboratory is confirming its first ever cases of Marburg. The virus is a high fatality hemorrhagic fever with symptoms broadly similar to those of Ebola. At least 5 people with the disease have died in the northwest Kagera region. In addition to fever, the symptoms also include vomiting, bleeding, and renal failure. VOA's Jackson Vunganyi has the latest Basketball Africa League highlights.
Keita passes to Sulaiman Berte, who completes a nice jump shot over the defense to get SMB into the game. Fofana made another jump shot to keep the score close in the second half. But SMB quickly increased the lead before Ismail Diarra scored a layup to put the Malians ahead 43-25. Stefan Konate hit a three from the corner as the second quarter closed.
Momentum, he hits the three.
SMB built a double-digit lead halfway in the third quarter, but Diarra signaled that ABC is still in the game as he finishes a layup under the basket. Good ball movement between Konate and Kone ended with a beautiful corner three by Konate as ABC built a 60-34 lead. Namakan Traore followed with a layup to maintain the lead for the Malians. Haruna missed a layup, opening the field for a long pass to Diarra, and Amayo allowing Diarra to finish with a thunderous dunk. Amayo misses the last-second jump shot, leaving SMB beaming with a convincing 90-71 victory.
Winners in this one.
The Sahara Conference of the 2023 Basketball Africa League concluded at the Dakar Arena, Senegal, on Monday, with defending champions US Monastir of Tunisia denied the chance to go to the finals in Kigali in May after losing their last game. Host AS Douane waited until the last game of the conference to beat Monastir 76-60 to qualify for the final, along with Stade Malien of Mali, ABC of Ivory Coast, and Reg of Rwanda. A behind-the-back pass from Brian Manning ended with an easy dunk by Ochirobia, pushing the lead for the Senegalese side. US Monastir fought hard to get into the game as Leyani drove into the paint for a spectacular basket. Crawford hit a quick three-pointer midway in the third quarter to push ASD's lead into double figures. Monastir's Jerome Rando answered with his own three-pointer from the top of the key to cut the lead into single digits.
Oh, the hand is on the handle for Rando.
But ASD pushed the pace with Boise hitting a jumper to keep the Senegalese ahead.
Beautiful score. The score is beautiful. Boissy does it again.
ASD sent the home crowd wild as they punctuated their win with a thunderous dunk by Mamadou Diagne.
Bounced into his ball. Look at it. Look at it. Unbelievable. Mamadou Diagne.
It's time for our technology segment, and joining us now is our tech reporter, Paul Ndiho. Paul, take it away.
Hello, Esther. In 2023, Nigeria adopted technological tools aimed at improving transparency and electoral fraud. But critics say the technology failed to deliver credible elections. I spoke with Adodien Adedije, a tech analyst based in Lagos, Nigeria. Welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you very much for having me.
You recently had elections in Nigeria. A lot of people criticized INEC for what happened. They said that the technology they deployed during the elections did not work. As a tech analyst, somebody who has been observing how technology works in Nigeria, what happened during the elections?
I think one of the exciting things that we all looked forward to in this particular election was the deployment of technology. The one thing we've always looked out for was how we can integrate technology into our elections better. And I think these elections was a pointer to that. There were itches and there were also disappointments regarding this. But then for this being the first time that we are largely using technology for our national elections, I think we've made some progress. But where we had bulk of our challenges were in the electronic transmission of results. And we had that in the presidential elections, which caused a lot of people to query INEC. I mean, people felt disappointed, particularly in the presidential elections, with the failure of being able to upload results from the polling units areas.
Did that sentiment change during the local elections?
More work still needs to be done in that regard. At least we've laid the foundation for us to start using technology in our elections with these particular elections. And we are hoping that as we move forward, INEC as a body will do a review of the things they did right and the things they did wrong, and improve on both sides.
You bring up a very good point. At the end of the day, it comes down to two things, credibility and transparency. There are a lot of people who say because of what happened during the presidential and in some cases the local elections, there was lack of transparency, there was lack of credibility. As a journalist, my job is on the line if people doubt my credibility. In the case of INEC, really, that it came down to that. How would you respond to stuff like that when people say the government spent a lot of money trying to build this system, but at the end of the day, it meant nothing?
A lot of people were disappointed with INEC, frankly speaking, with the scale of budgets that was given to them for the elections. I mean, people expected a lot more from them than we actually got. The polling units could not upload the verified results from the polling units to the INEC server. So it took about another 3 to 4 hours, which is around 9, 10 in the night before some results were being uploaded. So with that space of time gave room for doubts, gave room for ambiguity, and also threatens the credibility of INEC as an institution.
I studied Joseph Stalin. He once said that it really doesn't matter how many people show up to vote, but what matters is who counts the vote. And in the case of Nigeria, you have a lot of young people who felt disappointed. They think that the system, as it were, did not really change, even though they claim, quote unquote, they deployed the most advanced technology. In this particular case, they think that really INEC did what it had to do to make sure that the person who came out on top won. It didn't matter how many people showed up to vote. Is that something that you've seen or you've heard?
Yes, the ruling party won the elections as declared by INEC. However, one thing we have to also understand is that if INEC had done what they told Nigerians they were going to do, the doubts and people have in their credibility and the credibility of this current election would not have been there. Okay, because if INEC had allowed their officers in each polling unit to upload results as they're being counted across the nation, almost all the polling units could not transmit results at the right time. You understand? So within that space of time, before they could not upload and they eventually could upload, we created a window of ambiguity. So let's wait for the fact that we can get before we decide what's happened during the elections.
Well, Adedoyin, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.